Hello, my name is Derren Lawford, and welcome to this session. It's called, very snappy title, Indie Filmmaking, Protecting Creative Freedom in an M&A World. And joining me today, I have a formidable trio of CEOs who will share some of their secrets to surviving and thriving as an independent producer in a media world of ongoing disruption, consolidation, and innovation. And so joining me from left to right, we have Jane Root from Nutopia.
Hi.
We have Jamie Isaacs from Avalon.
Hello.
And we have Ellen Windemuth from Off the Fence.
Hello.
Okay. Well, Jane, we'll start with you. Now, clearly your programming as a company is characterized by premium, ambitious, high-quality productions. However, when Nutopia launched in 2009, there wasn't necessarily the market for that. And so at the time, that might have been seen as quite a risky strategy. So what made you decide that course of action rather than maybe just ask the broadcasters what it is that they wanted?
Risky, possibly insane. I'd had two experiences running networks at the BBC and Discovery Networks. And in both cases, the thing that I needed most were what we called network-defining shows. That would be things that people would really stand out across a year. And we had we always on both networks had lots of small projects. But what made you happy as someone running a network was when someone came in with something astounding and huge. And you very rarely get offered them when you're running networks. So I thought that was a good possibility. I also had the fun of being on the receiving end of Planet Earth at Discovery, which had made my boss so much money that it actually made him very happy for a while. So I thought, I went and pleaded with the BBC to do another one. I begged them, I pleaded with them. Bank of America and Ford, who are our sponsors, pleaded with me. They nearly cried. And I couldn't do it because the BBC were like, well, we've done it, we're not going to do it again. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. There's a gap.
Okay.
So that was Nutopia.
And in terms of the kind of things that you do, there are certain things, I guess, that may be sort of buck conventional wisdom. So you're not necessarily in a high volume game. I mean, a lot of the series that you have are maybe no more than, say, 12 episodes. But are you in the market for making, do you think I'm going to go and make out a landmark series, or do you think I'm going to make a returning series, or do you also think that there's a market for returning landmarks?
What we most love is a returning premium show that costs, we can sell for ridiculous amounts of money an episode, and then we can create an icon like Planet Earth, and that people will want to come back. And unlike when I pleaded with the BBC to give me Planet Earth at Discovery, if people did that with me, I wouldn't say no.
And how is it that you're getting people to say yes and commit to such large sums?
You just have to do a hell of a lot of development. I mean, I think it's probably the same for all of us, that development is everything in our business. You know, the title of this is Protecting Creative Freedom. For me, it's all about development. And if you get the development right and you really super invest in it, which we do, and you work at it and work at it and work at it, and you find something that's really different, then most of the time, not always, most of the time we can persuade someone to buy it.
And in terms of that length of time, in terms of an investment in development, how long are you spending on average on developing an idea?
Well, our shows, it's worth saying that our shows, Civilizations, which is just been airing in the UK, took 5 years to make. One Strange Rock took 3 years. So sometimes a year, 2 years. You know, it's a big deal.
Okay. Now, obviously this is about creative freedom, but there's also sort of financial freedom as well. Now, to a certain degree, you don't necessarily look to retain rights when you're making your shows. A lot of the people that you work with, either the Nat Geos or the Netflix of this world, the US broadcasters, they're going to have quite an aggressive rights position. Are rights something that you think about when you're thinking about your business?
I think there's something quite different about the American market and the British market. And as I live in America and I'm American now, it's become an absolute item of faith, I think, with British independence, that rights are everything. And it's not the same in America. There's none of the government provisions which allow people to retain rights. You have to earn rights. And so people have lots of different ways of creating businesses, and there's many, many successful American production companies who have never managed to retain rights, but are still very successful. Okay. So we take just a bit more transatlantic view about it.
Okay, and so what would you say would be the difference when you're working with the US broadcasters as opposed to the UK broadcasters in that regard?
Well, the opportunities are bigger for global broadcasters. I mean, I often say to people that I had such a different experience in the BBC where, quite honestly, you could have let BBC Two run for 2 years or maybe even 3 or 4 years without really making a single change. And it would have been fine. I mean, some of the things on it, like Horizon, had been going for 50 years. You know, it wasn't going to be... I wasn't going to get rid of it. And I made myself fantastically unpopular by killing some shows that people really loved and had been there for years. But that was the only way to ever get any space or money as a network person to do anything. I went to Discovery and I was like, okay, so show me what the schedule is. What's it look like in 3 years' time? And they showed me a big piece of paper of which 95% of it was empty. And I was like, okay, so we better commission some shows. And that's pretty much the same for American cable networks. This was before SVODs really became important. There was just this huge blank yawning spaces in the schedule. So if you came up with something that people wanted, they would commit to it big time.
Now, last year, 22 hours of the business that you won came exclusively from the US. Was that deliberate, or was that just where there was a particular appeal for those kinds of ideas?
It was kind of deliberate. I love British broadcasters, and I have lots of friends who work there and friends who work throughout the world at broadcasters. So, you know, but you know, if you want to make really big things, then you tend to gravitate towards the people who are going to buy really big things. And at the moment, they're global. I would have said 2 years ago American broadcasters, but now I'd say global broadcasters, people who are actually buying for the whole world.
Okay. Now, again, one of the ways that you can survive and thrive, I guess, is by teaming up with the right kinds of people and building your business out through consolidation and partnerships. Now, you've got an interesting collaboration with Roast Beef. Do you want to just talk us through that?
Well, Roast Beef are a documentary company. They've been going for 10 years. They've had 2 Oscar nominations. They've had more Emmys than I can remember, which is a bit embarrassing. And we really felt that we wanted to bring documentary filmmaking into the company, that was a skill set, really high-level documentaries, you know, Oscar nominee documentary filmmaking, and that was something they had. We also had a real feeling that kind of documentary approach, that you could supersize it, really, that you could make big, multi-episode, returnable, really big shows like that. And so that's how we're working together. Okay.
And clearly another way that you can make your mark in a global marketplace is by sort of doing big collaborations. And obviously Civilization is PBS and the BBC, and One Strange Rock, which is with yourself and Derren Aronofsky and Protozoa Pictures. What's the challenge and the opportunity in working on really big partnerships?
Well, the challenge is obviously it's more scary, because when things go wrong, they can really go wrong. But the capacity to work with really great people, there's nothing as exciting in the whole world as working with amazing people. And so like working with Derren on One Strange Rock, where you know, we had a moment where him and some of the London team, we were teaching astronauts who were about to film for us from the International Space Station. And they were getting the astronauts were getting a kind of masterclass in filmmaking from the guy who'd made Black Swan. So it was pretty fun and astounding for everybody. And so NASA were kind of thrilled that we could offer their ENSA, in fact, not NASA, that we could offer their astronauts that experience. So kind of fun things happen when you bring people together from different worlds.
Okay, and shall we have a look at what happens when we bring people together? Can we have a look at One Strange Rock?
I am going to tell you about the most incredible place. And you know what? You're walking on it. Our planet is literally bursting with life.
There's so much activity, and our planet is right in the middle of it.
I really wish that everyone could see the world the way that I've had a chance to see it.
The strangest place in the whole universe might just be right here.
Now, obviously, it may be too early to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The series is just launching globally. Landmark series. You spoke earlier about trying to make things returners. Is this the kind of thing that you'd want to see come back?
Ask Courtney Munro.
And one final question for now, which is, given the sort of the quality and the scale of the programs that you make, I'm assuming that you would have had suitors that would be looking to try and buy you or try and incorporate you into a bigger organization. What makes you say no when those overtures come?
It's just never felt like the right moment. And I'm also aware how much effort it takes to respond to those kind of investigations. So we've just said, I would never say never, but we're not going to spend a day a week of our working lives responding to those kind of inquiries. So right now we're kind of like, no thanks.
Okay. Thank you for now, Jane. And now we've got something completely different from Jamie. Jamie runs Avalon. It's the biggest true indie in the UK, with a turnover of 132 million last year. Now, in many ways, you're the polar opposite of Nutopia. In terms of volume and returning series, you've clocked up 50 hours of Channel 5 series, Nightmare Neighbour Next Door, and nearly 250 hours of BBC daytime format Air Hunters. So what drives the desire for volume, and how does that help you sort of thrive and survive globally?
Well, first, I don't run all of Avalon. I run the non-scripted programming bit. I'd like to run all of Avalon, but I don't yet. And I think the desire for volume is, from a business perspective, that's about how you can make some money out of a project, because obviously it costs a lot of money to launch shows and get them on air and make them good. And if you don't have volume, the sums just don't work out very well. And if you have a show that has a certain amount of presence on a channel and rates, then that becomes a significant brand for that channel. They'll be commissioned in volume. You can make the show more efficiently. We've got more shows to sell internationally through Avalon distribution, and it's a kind of virtuous circle. You know, the other end of that are the kind of singles and three-parters that are hard to make and aren't properly financed by the broadcasters and don't come back. Whilst they're creatively exciting, it's very difficult to kind of run a business and pay the bills and keep investing in development if those are the kind of shows you've got. So volume is important for us to run a business and have a kind of presence, but also if we're making shows at the lower end of the price range, very different to Jane, then you have to have volume. You just can't do it otherwise. So it's one of the reasons. We don't only look for those large volume commissions, but they can be very useful.
Okay. And do you have a recent example of a show that, because presumably just because it's a lower price point doesn't mean that it's not going to reach a popular audience. So do you have an example of a show where you might have done something at that lower price point, but it's still punched through for the network?
Well, I mean, you mentioned just one of the shows that we've made in volume, which was The Nightmare Neighbour Next Door, a documentary series for Channel 5, which has got up to just short of 50 episodes and was at one point the #1 show on Channel 5 about 4 years ago. And that's not an expensive show, but it's kind of is well made and it's noisy, it's quite simple, and it speaks very clearly to its kind of audience, and it's very relatable. It's about finding those characters and experience that a lot of people are interested in, and kind of reflect their interests and the world back to them. So we're all about trying to find those shows, and it's not really about the price, it's more about how interesting is it going to be for a UK terrestrial audience, which is where my focus is at the moment, rather than the US or international. So for those kinds of shows, you just got to find the theme, the characters, and a way of executing them that's going to work for the money, and take it from there. But that was not an expensive show, but it was one of their highest performing shows for a long time.
Okay, do you want to tell us about the latest example that you've got?
Sorry?
Do you want to tell us about the latest example that you've got?
In what sense?
The £1 house.
Oh yeah, so, well, £1 house was a bit more of an expensive show. It took a long time to make, but it was still very cheap compared to what broadcasters would be spending on shows like yours, Jane, I imagine. And it's basically, we try and find true stories and people in dramatic situations and turn those into documentaries. And the £1 house is a really interesting example. Our producers in Southampton, Topical, found this great story. They sold the show to Channel 4, and it's been a very big hit for the channel, and it's just been recommissioned. So there's a little bit of tape if you want to look at it.
Let's have a look.
Over the last 30 years, the city of Liverpool has been transformed with millions of pounds of investment. But just 2 miles south of the impressive skyline lies a forgotten area of the city. In an area known as the Webster Triangle, streets lie empty and the houses are decaying. Liverpool City Council are trying to change this. They're selling off houses for just £1 each.
All this cost £1. It's a bargain.
But the small price tag comes with some big risks.
There's the kitchen.
Oh my God.
The £1 house buyers must put their own money and effort into fixing these rundown houses in an area not without its challenges.
We pulled up with the kids in the car and there was a woman in the street doing a number 2. Don't pick anything up.
We've had 3 or 4 shootings around here and 2 murders.
For nearly 3 years, cameras have followed people through the highs
look at the bath!
And lows. As they try to make this risky housing experiment work. But behind the headlines, the scheme is not going to plan.
We've had no apology, no nothing.
50 houses should be occupied, but instead, there's only one.
Someone's obviously got up, took the camera.
We've had a break-in. They've taken advantage of the fact that there's nobody living on the road, there's no community here, and it's a bit of a ghost town, really.
Are the £1 houses really worth the risk?
Owning our own home is such a good opportunity that we are willing to kind of gamble.
Obviously, Avalon isn't just a producer, you're a distributor as well. So how important are rights for you as a business? Would you ever pitch stuff where you would surrender the rights?
No.
Under no circumstance?
No. Not unless someone was offering a lot of money as compensation for the kind of loss of rights. It's not something I would consider, and certainly I don't think anyone else at Avalon would, with a kind of an owned piece of IP that we've developed, because we very much take the view at Avalon that as creative producers, our investment in ideas and our creativity has value beyond the broadcaster's kind of financing of an hour of television. And we want to be excited about what we're doing, and part of that excitement is the journey that shows can go on internationally and their value. And if things are very successful and are hits, we want to be able to not only make money out of that, but also to be part of the excitement that goes with that, and seeing that show travel, and to also control its direction and where it goes. So, you know, as I said, my focus is mainly on the UK broadcasters, mainly the UK terrestrials still, and you know, we're able to retain and control rights, and it's something that's very important to us. And I think that there's a lot of talk about Netflix and Amazon and all these other people who come into the market, you know, that have got money to spend, and that's fine, but it's still, in my opinion, a minuscule kind of amount of what's possible for a producer like me. It's a tiny bit of the target, and it would be wrong of me to sort of focus on that when there's still the UK broadcasters have massive schedules to fill, have a lot of money to spend. It's a favourable rights position. You know, and so I'm trying not to be distracted by so-and-so's got a commission at Netflix and sort of drop all the UK development and think, oh, we've got to go over there and get the Netflix deal, so I probably won't get it. Do you know what I mean? So for me, the traditional model still works, and that's what we're focusing on, still with the idea to license our IP internationally to US broadcasters, and you know, keep going like that. It's something that is fundamental to our business, yeah.
Yeah, and before we talked about, there was a show that you guys did called World's Strictest Parents, and you don't necessarily need to go into the specific figures for it, but that really worked well in that model for you. Well,
that was a show that, you know, a few years ago was made on a very small license fee for the BBC. It was a tiny amount of money, but it just proves the value of rights, because that show was sold into however many territories and remade in all those territories, in the US, in Australia, in Scandinavia, in Germany, in France. And you know, it was very exciting to see something, because we owned the IP, travel around the world like that. I mean, everyone knows that that's what can happen, and I still think that is possible, and it's still the goal, is to create shows that can have that kind of howl around internationally. And the UK terrestrials is a great place to put your efforts if that's what you want.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said you wouldn't want to necessarily get distracted by Netflix, but you wouldn't necessarily rule it out. Do I sense that there's a slight distinction for you between the kind of conversation you could have with Netflix as opposed to a traditional US broadcaster?
Well, I think anything's possible, and it's all about what have you got? What have you got to sell? What's your project? Who's it appropriate for? And then it's about what kind of deal can you do? I think the truth is, you know, it's very difficult to sell from paper, as we know, to, you know, cable networks or networks at all. And I think you probably could do a good deal with Netflix if you've got something that's packaged up right. They need a way to market shows more than anything. So it's about the kind of the names and who you've got as part of the project, as well as the idea. So it's all definitely possible, but it feels like we don't really have anything right now for them that I'm making a big fuss about, but if it came along, it would be interesting to see what kind of deal we could be done. Because if they're wanting to take the whole world, then, you know, what are they paying in return for that? You know, what does that deal look like? I don't know yet. We haven't done one, but I imagine, like all deals, there's some flexibility and there's a negotiation to be had. So it would be quite interesting to get there. Have you done any deals with Netflix, Jane?
Yeah, we're making 2 big things for them at the moment.
Is it a walk in the park?
They're really great people, and it's just very different to dealing with somebody who has a schedule. I mean, there's one moment, talk about creativity.
But in terms of the deal?
The deal, they're very different. The two shows are really, really different. And I think you're going to see them getting more flexible, actually, because they're starting to do things where they don't take world rights.
Yeah, that's right.
I think you're starting...
I think you'll see the rights position improve and the money go down.
Probably.
They're 2 levers, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But also I would argue that, Jamie, and also yourself, Ellen, you might be in a better position to be having those conversations with Netflix because you understand the value of rights. So if someone's going to offer you a price point, you can do your own sales projections and go, well, actually, no, we think we might make more than that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. It's just very important. Also, I think emotionally as a producer, for me, the idea that you're kind of that's it. You're sort of one and done. You make the show, you got the fee, it's gone, and that's the end of it. And that thing could be up there for 30 years, and people are watching it, but your relationship with it is essentially over. Just feels a bit like, not right for me. And, you know, even if you're kind of well paid for it, it still doesn't feel as exciting as controlling rights in something, to be honest.
Okay. Now the other string that Avalon has to its bow is obviously its great talent relationships. So when you're looking at your talent and your programs, are you thinking about talent that, are you still thinking, I just want that talent to land in the UK, or are you thinking about talent that can travel as well? Or is it always UK first for you guys?
For me, it's always the UK first, because I've sort of given up sort of second guessing what is going to work internationally and what isn't. You know, some things you look at it and you think, yeah, that might, you know, or you get excited because you think, oh, we've cracked it with this format. But the telly gods don't really work like that, and they often slap you down when you start thinking you've got it licked. So, you know, many times I've, you know, had shows, well, this is the one, then nothing happens international. Then you're surprised by something that seems very UK-centric, and suddenly it's sort of working. So I don't put too much focus on international. As I say, my key focus is on the UK broadcasters who have got money to spend and need new shows, and then see what happens. You know, it's still really the way we look at things.
Mm-hmm. And obviously another way you can survive and thrive when there's so much consolidation going around is to consolidate yourself. And you guys have bought companies in the past. Are you still in the market to be buying companies? And if you're looking at a company in 2018, what's your criteria?
Well, I think that we're always looking for bringing talented creative producers into the fold in a number of ways. That could be through an acquisition, it could be through a relationship, it could be, you know, through helping someone get their own venture moving. I think the whole sort of ethos is to be a place where creative people do their best work, and that's across the board, you know, talent management, distribution, production, live. Just try and be a place that's friendly to creative talent and, you know, help them get where they want to go with their creativity and shows, and own the rights along the way.
Okay, now last year you guys made over 100 hours, and you know, majority of that was made in the UK, but you have had some startings of success in the US. What do you think was the key to that success in the US?
Well, the success in America has come through the management side of the business, which isn't something I'm involved with, and they've nurtured kind of some pretty significant talent along the way to becoming significant artists in America, who then got their own shows moving, like John Oliver, who has his show on HBO. So it's been a long, kind of gradual process of developing on-screen talent for the US market and then producing their shows with them. It hasn't happened quickly. You know, that's been an evolution at Avalon for some time, but it's starting to really work now, and that's a, you know, very significant bit of the business.
Right. It's a great note to end on for now. Thanks, Jamie. Last but by no means least, we have Helen Windemuth, and you're going to be sharing your thoughts on surviving and thriving.
That's right, and for that, I decided to actually walk you guys through a PowerPoint, a very quick one, and Derren, please interject if you have any questions. I'm doing this because we're actually quite old. We're turning 25 years next year, and in the last 24 years, we've actually had to pivot many times, in part to find, you know, a niche within a niche where we felt comfortable. We never had a home broadcaster. We're based in Amsterdam, and therefore we didn't have the UK or the US as a place where we are guaranteed a pre-sale or a commission every time. So to walk you through, we do half of our revenue is production, the other half is distribution. It's always been that way. I started it in 1994. We have about 6,500 hours of programming in distribution. We represent Smithsonian Channel on the one side and WeTV on the lifestyle side, as well as HHMI, which is the Howard Hughes Medical Trust. They have a wonderful production studio called Tangle Bank. Our production division does three things, and really I think that's why I was invited to this event, because I sit right between these two producers, and that is we do medium run series, so between 6 and 29 episodes. We keep rights wherever possible, but if somebody commissions us something, and that very often happens in the US, if broadcasters want 10 or 13 episodes, we generally end up with no rights. We work from very low budgets, which can be for digital broadcasters, 50,000 an hour, and our high is about 3 million an hour when we're doing things like feature docs, because we do television, we produce for digital, and we also produce feature docs. We're in a very narrow niche when it comes to production, and our main areas are nature and wildlife and science. And then we do some people and culture, some travel and adventure, and some history. I wondered whether you'd like to know why we're still here, because you sort of think, God, you're pretty old. How did you hang on? And I think that the pivot is important. And also exploring the depth of your niche is important. And working with my team members has been very important, because together we had many, many years of finding out where our heart lies. So I can show you that the first way we started this is we started working with brands. And we've done solely brand-financed feature docs. That's where the sort of higher-end films come from. We did one for Grupo Éxito, which is a supermarket chain in Colombia. And the other one we just released is we worked for Auchan, which is a French supermarket chain, and they wanted us to do a feature doc in Romania about Romanian biodiversity.
So Ellen, how much prominence is the brand looking for in those projects, and are they looking to retain the rights? How does that work?
No, we have the rights, but what they're looking to do is culturally cross-market, because what they're doing culturally in both of these countries, for instance, the local population has been quite disenfranchised for a very long time. There's been a lot of unrest in the cultures. Magia Salvaje, the Colombian film, was made at the time where they were going through this terribly painful negotiation with the FARC and the government. Terrible decisions had to be made. And so in a way, you can see why a supermarket chain would say, you know what, I'd like to calm down our consumer, I'd like to give them something to make them feel that they, live at least in a very, very intact, biodiverse ecosystem, and it actually did work. I think it became the most successful theatrical release in Colombia ever. It was used actually on an evening during the negotiations in Cuba at the ambassador's house. Everybody watched it together. And they said, thank God there's at least one thing we agree on. So you can see how it helps as a marketing stunt for the supermarket chains. And it's the same thing in Romania. It's really helping them to market and sell more of their stuff. The other hybrid projects we're working on is we did one a few years ago called Gorongosa Park, I think 2 years ago. We collaborated between an NGO, an eco-philanthropist, PBS and National Geographic to create a series that was a bit nicer than what National Geographic could have afforded on their own. So we're helping to enhance budgets, but it's also a tentpole project, so there were really quite big campaigns attached to the series. And we're now doing the same with a new project called Europe's New Wild. We're working with the WWF, with Canon, with National Geographic International, as well as with an NGO called Rewilding Europe, which represents a new movement in European conservation. So we could maybe have a look at a clip.
Okay.
Okay, so that's that. 3 new projects. I'm working on one on circular economy. I'm working on a beautiful film that is going to be used for a campaign against ocean mining. And I'm working on a film based on a famous book by an Argentinian journalist on child malnutrition. Those are all 3 feature docs. Last not least, I just wanted to say you don't have to stick to the television business to be in media, because I think we're very much in the tree business, and I think we're in the anti-ivory trade business, and I think we're in the rewilding Europe business. We are in the try to sort of help people make films for a better future for our children business. And we're in the anti-ocean mining and pro-ocean conservation business. So you can add with every project a business that you feel committed to for the rest of your life, as in my case, I do. So that's that.
So that's interesting. So if we've had a more premium focus, a slightly more rights focus, and now a slightly more purpose focus in terms of the business. I'm just interested in, you know, it's hard enough trying to work out what a broadcaster wants in your native territory, then trying to work out what they want internationally. And you're trying to do that, and then you're trying to align the motives of NGOs and brands. A, that sounds like quite a lot of work, and B, how do you align all of those 3 things?
I just think it's because we've been doing this for so long. I know the NGOs, I know a lot of brands, and I know a lot of directors of marketing departments in these brands, and I know that the broadcasters struggle for the money for bigger projects.
Okay. This is a question for all of you now, actually. What would you say is currently the biggest challenge that you all might face?
Having a good idea. That's the hardest thing. And then demonstrating it without spending too much money.
I think it's the same for all of us, isn't it? Is that I mean, I tell you one thing, though. I think it's about focus. And what's really interesting is the 3 of us are all really different, but we all absolutely have what we're determined to do. So when I hear you say, I'm not going to get led astray by people saying you ought to be pitching to Netflix, and same for me, that I watch your program and think, God, it's so great. Like, I was involved in a lot of that kind of shows. Oh, I'd love to get back in that. And it's like, no, you've got to focus on what it is that you can do. And that's the only way that it works. I think it's the same for you too.
It's very much the same for me, and I think that I may not be in this business, I may have left the business if I hadn't discovered that what we make can actually have a direct effect on who we make it with and what we make it about. I felt at some point about 5 years ago that I was exploiting animals and I was exploiting nature so that, you know, we could get money and that broadcasters could get ratings. And I thought, that's not fair. And the really wonderful thing that happened was that Netflix made it okay to have films for purpose again. They brought this idea back that you can actually make a film like Blackfish, and you can actually have more than, you know, I want to tell a story and I'd like to be paid for it, but it gave us the opportunity to actually work again for purpose.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say is the biggest opportunity for you all at the moment? The thing that you're most excited about exploring as a business opportunity?
Well, we're living in a world where everything is changing. I mean, a few years ago there were a lot of rules about the shape, the size, the amount of money, the focus, what you could do, what you could say, and I think all those things have been exploded, and that makes it a great moment to be doing what we all do. That's what I feel.
I agree.
And if all 3 of you were launching your businesses today, knowing what you all know, what kind of advice would you be giving to yourself if you're going to launch your business today?
What advice would I give myself?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that I would try and skip the first 3 years where I was trying to figure it out and just go directly to the point where I kind of had a plan. Because we did have a plan, but it took us a while.
I would say something similar. I mean, I haven't launched a business from scratch. The idea is terrifying. But I think the thing I would know is that you need more money than you think you're going to need to get through those first 3 or 4 years, because it takes a while for you to start working efficiently. So that would be the advice. And yeah, stay focused on your creativity. And that's the most important thing you've got.
And I would probably not start another business all by myself and run it by myself, but I would start it with a head of digital, a head of distribution, a head of development, and a head of social media.
Sounds expensive.
We'd all work for nothing, of course.
That's exploiting animals. I mean, people.
And do you think that there's a lot of talk about there being too many indies and too much competition? Is that something that keeps you awake at night, or do you not worry about that?
I think that's more of a problem for the broadcasters in some respects, because they seem to be the ones having to have meetings with them all the time. But it, doesn't really bother me. Does it bother you, Jane?
All the figures show that everybody is consuming hours and hours and hours more a week of media. So that you only have to. I spent a lot of my life going on the train from Washington, D.C. to New York. 6 o'clock in the morning, everybody's watching something on their phone or on their laptop. And that wasn't the case a few years ago. So that's a whole extra 3 hours a morning of consumption that people do. We all live in a world where we are more involved with it. So
I do think there are a lot of companies being sort of artificially kept afloat, though, by a lot of kind of money that's thinking it might make money if it spends money. So I don't know how long that's going to continue, So I think if there are good producers out there who want to go it alone because they believe in themselves and they can do it, that's fantastic. They should absolutely do that. But it's not easy, Well,
starting a company not only involves really loving the creative freedom, there's a point in time when you realize that you know far more about photocopier rental than you ever thought that you wanted to. So there's that side of it.
Okay. We've literally got 1 minute left, so if anyone has a quick question. Yep. I can't see, so if anyone has a question. Okay, well then I will just thank my panel now. Jane, Jamie, Ellen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Derren.
Thank you.
Thank you.